Hi, this is Ren.
This is Casey.
And this is All Walks of Film, or TV, because today we are talking about the Hulu original show, The Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this has been adapted before into a movie. I haven't seen the movie, and I haven't read the book written by Margaret Atwood.
Yeah, there's not going to be a lot of, actually, that's not how it was, because we don't know how it was. We're heathens.
Yeah. But we're going to talk about the show because I think that the show has a lot of important and relevant issues. I'm just going to give you a warning. This show will get political. So if you don't like that, I would say probably don't watch the show.
Ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, literally just never listen to this podcast ever or watch this TV show ever. Just don't even do it. Don't even trip, dog.
You can't not draw political parallels when watching this show.
Yeah.
Especially with what's going on right now. So maybe stick to some of the Marvel TV shows that are on right now, even though Luke Cage is totally about Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's practically impossible to...
Well, I mean, even look at the DCU. Most of it is based in political shit. Some of it is political nonsense, but that's the basis of it.
Yeah, I mean...
They didn't just coincidentally have Batman quote Dick Cheney.
Right.
That wasn't just how odd.
And while the Marvel universe outside of the TV shows tends to, lean a little bit less political and a little bit more kid-friendly, there is still some political stuff because you can't really avoid not talking about what's going on in the world in entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you go to pure fantasy, which I don't even know.
I don't even think a lot of pure fantasy does that either.
Yeah, you can't watch Game of Thrones without drawing political parallels.
You literally can't watch anything science fiction.
Yeah.
Ever in your whole life.
Right. Science fiction.
It's like, oh, you like Neil Blomkamp? You're excited about this Out Studios thing, but you don't like politics? Whoops.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, you can watch it without having that context, and I guess you could appreciate it, but...
Can you?
Some people can remove themselves and just view it as entertainment. I know, but that's how some people go.
Okay, not to get into spoilers, but when the first episode is literally set in 2020 and a big part of the storyline is about a politician and how he behaves and what happens to him, it's kind of like, sure, you can remove yourself.
All right, so we're talking about The Handmaid's Tale.
Right.
So this show is probably Hulu's most successful TV show. I know they've tried before.
Have they had TV shows?
Yeah, they had. The Booth at the End, I think, was the first one that I watched, and that was like a no-budget TV show. Then they had The Path, which I watched a little bit of. They've had a couple animated shows, and every streaming service is offering original content. Amazon Prime is offering original TV shows as well, like Hand of God, and there's one with John Goodman and I Love Dick. I
think I Love Dick is a Amazon Prime original. Plus, of course, you can't forget Transparent.
Right, and now you have Shudder coming out with a new documentary horror thing. So, everybody's trying to do their own thing. It's essentially
Netflix
just like
is even
cable.
Already canceling their shit.
Yeah, if you want to do, if you want us to do a podcast about Netflix canceling shows, just put it in the recommendations, and we will have a nice little chat about it. All right, so I was really excited about this show because the promos looked really interesting, and I like Elizabeth Moss. I've kind of been a fan of her for a while now.
Forever, basically. I mean, you were watching Top of the Lake when it came out, weren't you?
Yeah, I watched Top of the Lake when it came out, and I watched a little bit of Mad Men. I wasn't huge into the show. Mm-hmm. I know it's terrible. I haven't seen Mad Men, but I plan to change that at some point in time.
I've heard that Mad Men is kind of hard to get into if you don't like Draper, and he's not a likable character. Not because he's despicable, just because he's kind of boring.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I watched 5 episodes, but that's not enough for me to fully gauge a character.
That's 5 hours.
Yeah, I know, but TV shows...
No, but I'm saying if after 5 hours you can't fully gauge a character, there's a problem.
It's a very slow-paced show, which is like one of the reasons why I didn't get into it. However, The Handmaid's Tale is not. It gets right into it, like, right away. Mm-hmm. So, in the beginning of the show, they're running away from these government officials. It's not really clear what's going on. They just kind of throw you into the middle of it. And then June gets captured, and then you find out that it's this patriarchal society. It is the United States. I believe the book was ambiguous on the location. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that. But this show specifically made it the United States and in the near future.
Right.
Which definitely adds a lot of political and social context to the film, especially with some of the things going on right now. Now, this
other thing, too, is that it's not just a patriarchal system, it's a religious patriarchal system.
Yeah, we'll get into the religious aspect as well. So essentially, if you've seen the movie Children of Men, it's sort of similar to that concept. Don't worry, I'm not going to give any spoilers. In the movie Children of Men, nobody can have children. And you watch as society kind of lingers around without that hope in the world. In this story, most women can't have children. And the women who can are selected to be handmaids. It's essentially like a house assistant whose main purpose is to breed.
One of the things that is a little confusing in this show, there are a lot of elements that are confusing, but one of them is that they basically just figure out who's fertile based on have you had a kid. But not every woman who's had a kid is a handmaid.
Yeah,
and it's not like they're old. Like, it didn't, unless like there was something that they didn't really get into that. There's a character who I won't disclose, but you find out that she had a kid. But she doesn't look like menopausal. They don't really get into why she's not a handmaid. So it's a little confusing.
It's very clear that they're treated like cattle because they literally have the ear clips.
Yeah, the tags.
Which you see administered in the last episode, even though chronologically it takes place before then, but...
Yeah, the way that they draw everything out is actually one of the things I really like about the show. Like, you don't even know the name of the religion until, like, 3 episodes before it's over. You don't know that there's a new word for what the United States is for most of the show. You don't see, like, a lot of their logos or symbolism or, like, the way that these systems of the religion work for a long time. Which is kind of interesting. It's a really good way to keep viewers really engaged in, like, a sort of a mystery about the show. And you just kind of be like, oh, that's what that is. I didn't even know. But, like, it's also kind of plays into how it's part of their everyday life, that it's not even a thing that gets mentioned.
Yeah. I remember when looking at some of the production stills and even looking at some of the pictures in the book, I was like, this is science fiction? What?
I would really hesitate to call it science fiction because, like, the only way that it's really scientific is talking about the lack of science.
It still qualifies as science fiction, but it's very
dystopian. Shush.
But dystopian usually,
but not in this case.
Science fiction.
It's not sci-fi. Done.
Given that it follows many of the tropes of sci-fi, I'm still gonna have it called sci-fi because
it has literally nothing to do with sci-fi.
The reason why it's sci-fi is because people can't have children.
That's literally not even disclosed as to how or why yet.
The Road technically counts as sci-fi as well.
It doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
A lot of dystopian stuff counts as sci-fi.
Yeah, but that one doesn't.
All right, so I'm going to say it's sci-fi. Casey is going to say it's not. Put your comments in below, and we'll see who's right about that.
Well, when, like, science, like, most of the point of the story is that we're not utilizing technology we have, but also technology is not any further along than it is right now. Like, the most technologically advanced thing we see in the entire TV show are machine guns and pregnancy tests.
We see computers.
Yeah, but, like, that's not more technically advanced than anything we have now. It's not a part of the plot or the story.
Science fiction doesn't always have to be futuristic.
It doesn't have to be futuristic, but it has to pertain to the storyline. And when the only way that pertains to the storyline is the lack of it,
they still have to have children. That still counts as sci-fi.
No.
So moving on. June's name gets turned to Ofried, which is probably the most unappealing name that she could have, but that's sort of how these handmaids are treated. There's no sexuality that they present. It's as basic and plain as possible.
Also, that's not the disturbing part about it. Well, all of the handmaids are named after their commanders, their masters, pretty much. So her commander's name is Fred Waterford. So her name becomes of Fred because she's Fred's property. So also the handmaids don't get to have their real name. They're just designated as people's property, but then they get shifted around a lot. So like one of the things in the story is that a woman named Janine has to go from being of Warren to of Daniel. They just changed her name because she was shifted from being Warren's property to Daniel's property. It's pretty disgusting.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about the show is, at least for me, I learned a lot about women by watching this show. And it's not because this show depicts something that is equivalent to reality. It's sort of in its exaggeration. I was able to understand a lot of the struggles and put things in perspective that I haven't really thought about before, such as this whole concept of living a life in submission and not being able to speak out when you want to, and working each day in the servitude of others. It's something that it put this whole historical thing of patriarchal societies where people were not living as equals in perspective by exaggerating it for this story.
Yeah, I think one of the ways the show does that too is with Serena Waterford, the commander's wife. She's really important. She's really learned. She's been a part of what's made the society the way it is. She's written the laws. She's been a linchpin in making this entire system happen. And she is still set to the same standards that limit her and her abilities. Because that's the way she wrote it.
And I kind of love that irony. Just that there's some people that, especially getting into religion and stuff like that, the fact that for the longest time, women couldn't be members of the church, prominent members like priests or preachers or anything like that. Now that is changing, and I grew up, my mom's a minister, but yeah, I got to hear from a lot of people that didn't think that was possible, didn't think that was right. And, it's just an interesting thing that, women even today are subjugated to this sort of mentality because either their religious doctrine or their society and culture, places them into certain submissions.
I mean, the most notable one is the predication of the entire show. All of the women are designated to their standing in life based on their ability to have children. And that is literally the one important quality that women have in this world. As if, that's not the way it actually is in America already.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because Fred and Serena don't have sex anymore because sex is only for procreation. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that Serena really wants to in several parts, but they just have it set up in this way that the only way that this can be done is for the sake of procreation. But when you actually see the act, what do they call it? The
ceremony. They have a whole thing where they're trying to figure out, how do we convince people that this is actually a religious thing, and how do we market this so people will actually do it, because it's so ludicrous and stupid and also has nothing to do with their religion at all.
Yeah, it's so funny because this is a show about sex and a lot of sex, but it's probably the least appealing thing I've ever fucking seen. The ceremony is gross.
Yeah, it's really disgusting. But pretty much all
everybody
the sex
has
in the
their
show is really disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their clothes on during the ceremony. It's
everyone's together, but they're not looking at each other.
Yeah,
there's a lot of physical contact with we don't look, we don't make eye contact, nothing.
I remember when Ofried did And it was like that super awkward moment, like where they're like looking at each other for a minute.
Yeah, it's gross. And like when you hear her internal monologue where she's like, I just think about what's blue. I like just think about literally anything else but this because this is awful. And they don't shy away from calling it exactly what it is. It is rape in this context. 100%. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
I like that the show doesn't like they don't bring it up in every episode or anything, but they also don't shy away from that is exactly what it is.
It's one of those things that could turn people off of the show like immediately because yeah, this is a show about rape. And that usually tends to like push a lot of people's buttons, though given the success of this show, I think that people can handle it, unlike, you know, what op-eds and everything try to say. However, this show gives the subjective point of view on this and doesn't make it titillating, which is one thing that I see is kind of a problem with how it's portrayed in other forms of media, particularly horror.
There's a lot of really good horror, though, that doesn't do that.
True.
But it is fucked up when that happens. Like, that's not cool. But I don't think that means that, oh, all of a sudden rape's off the table. You can't talk about it, you can't depict it. No. Bad.
Yeah, well, I'm a strong defender of free speech, and I personally think that so long as real people aren't getting raped and real people aren't getting hurt, and it's still in a fictional context, that pretty much anything is fair game. But that's me.
Well, no, there needs to be responsibility to it. Like, when you look at 13 Reasons, it's like, oh, of course you can talk about rape, suicide, domestic violence, alcohol and substance abuse. You can talk about these things, of course. But when you do it in such a blunt, ham-fisted, irresponsible way, and gear it specifically at the people it's gonna hurt the most, not cool. Not acceptable. There's
a moral responsibility to that. And by the way, we're still working on our 13 Reasons Why video. It's going to take us a little bit of time because we're trying to delicately talk about a situation that the show clearly didn't.
Actually, it's about trying to talk delicately about every situation that the show didn't handle delicately at all, which is basically all of them.
Yeah, it is going to be a 13 Reasons Why about 13 Reasons Why. So stay tuned for that. It's coming. It's just taking us a little while.
Right, and that does also play into I think it's kind of interesting seeing the way that 13 Reasons Why affects society versus the way that The Handmaid's Tale affects society. Like, when you look at the copycats for 13 Reasons Why are literally committing suicide. That is horrific and horrible and unacceptable for a show to be that irresponsible about it. You look at the copycats for Handmaid's Tales, they're holding protests. They're doing public displays against against patriarchal systems and oppressive government.
And let us clarify about patriarchal systems, because I know that sometimes when these things are expressed that people immediately think that it's anti-male, all this kind of stuff. No, whereas like patriarchal societies have traditionally been men ruling and everything like that. As far as I will argue, I don't think the answer to a patriarchal society is a matriarchal society. There needs to be something of unity. Now, there will be people that will argue otherwise, that will say that, no, women need to be in power because that'll fix things. But I think the show does a clear and interesting way to show that women can be awful too.
Well, it also was interesting that they had a couple of scenes where they specifically address our contemporary anti-male problematic viewpoint with Moira and June and Lucas. So that's the main, that's the protagonist and her husband and the best friend who plays Pusey from
Moira.
Moira, yeah, from Orange is the New Black. You know, there's a scene in modern day when like some of the stuff is first starting to go down a little bit, and all of the women have been fired from their jobs and their bank accounts have been frozen, and legally all of their property has been handed over to their next of kin as long as they're men. And Lucas is trying to assure his wife, like, hey, you know, it's okay, I'm gonna take care of you, obviously. And they both start sort of making fun of him about, like, his toxic masculinity and, like, how condescending he sounds about how, like, he's gonna take care of her or whatever. But look at the literal situation that's happening. It's not that he thinks that she can't take care of herself or any such thing. It's just he's assuring her that while there is this outside force that is fucking with them, he's gonna make sure she's okay.
Yeah,
you know, he's just trying to comfort her in that moment. And I like that they point out how taking these social reactions to systemic problems and applying it to individuals, regardless of whether they are a proponent of that or not, is actually problematic and kind of fucked up and unfair.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest frustrations that I've had with feminism over the past, I want to say like 15 years, when things are sort of changing from being about equal rights and women's choice and all that kind of stuff to this idea of like female superiority, moral superiority, and this whole concept that all men are umbrellaed into this sort of monstrous identity placed
it's like
on them.
All men are part of the patriarchy, all men have male privilege, you know, all men have, you know, all white men especially, and all cis men have white male cis privilege, regardless of their standing in life or the way that they function in their society.
I'm against all these kind of broad generalizations. I'm against it with women. I'm against it with gay people. I'm against it with trans people. I'm against it with various people of religious identities. So long as they're not affecting other people's lives, that's fine with me. You know, have your identity, be who you are. But the minute it starts impeding on other people's lives, that's when I have an issue. And to draw parallels with this show and some of the stuff that's going on, one of the first things that I thought was some of the horrible stuff that extreme Muslims do, like FGM, and some of the ways that women are subjugated in their society, particularly places like Saudi Arabia. This show certainly alludes to Sharia law, that concept.
Right, I mean, like...
Which I think a lot of people forget. Christianity and Islam are more alike than we give it credit for.
Right, like, one of the very few problems I have with... It's pretty much the only problem, actually, I have with the way that everything's set up, is I like how this society works extremely well to sort of be an umbrella term, or an umbrella expression of basically every form of oppressive government, every form of oppressive religion, and every form of oppressive patriarchy. And, like, one of the things I like is that it's clearly a fascist state. Like, let's not even kid ourselves, you know. It's all based on genetics, it's all based around color coding and making, obviously identifying who everybody is in life. It's about punishing people who don't conform, and, you know, people are gender traitors and all this stuff. But it's not like they're very visually obviously Nazis, you know. It's about fascism, not just one specific easy knee-jerk thing. But I think that where it becomes a problem is that a lot of this stuff is based on the Bible, and I kind of wish it wasn't. You can have it be about God because most religions have God, you know, and they don't really say the word God. They say him, his, all that stuff, which I thought was really nice to make it not specific to one religion, but sort of make it a problem with every form of oppressive religion, not even religion in general, just this oppressive form that's also not even true to the real soul of what religion is, which they kind of get into. Is like, how do we market this, because this doesn't really conform to anything in our, you know, religious text or our religious teachings. We have to make something up, like make up a reason that fits in. But when you introduce a Bible, very specifically a Bible, all of a sudden it's Christianity. And I kind of wish that it wasn't, just because, of course, this is emblematic of Christian extremity. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be at all. It's just, it would be nice if it was about everything. Like, the way that Mad Max Fury Road kind of got around it is they brought in Norse mythology, because nobody really practices Norse mythology anymore. So when you bring that in, and you talk about, like, Valhalla and all this stuff, when you use that as the tool of, this is how religion can be oppressive, not because the religion is bad, but because when it's utilized, it can become a tool of oppression, people aren't going to immediately get offended because that's their religion and they take it personally. But when you do something where you're like, it's a Bible, all of a sudden you have people who are Christians who don't believe that it should be oppressive and who are good people and who religion has helped their lives, which is good, but all of a sudden it becomes personal because you're making an attack on them because that's part of their life. If it could have stayed a little bit more ambiguous to talk about the oppressive nature of religion, then I think that would have been a little bit more beneficial to the show.
I disagree. And the reason why I disagree is because the interaction with Aunt Lydia and Ofried wouldn't have had as much weight if we weren't familiar with the religion. Knowing the verses and passages in the Bible where they're clearly contradicting themselves, I think helps the narrative. Also, the last episode with the stoning, the Christianity has to kind of be there, because if that's not established, then you have to add more world building. You have to essentially...
But there's so much world building already. I don't think it is definitely more difficult. I get your point 100%, because that definitely does help with a lot of these more intimate moments. But I think that there could have been ways around that.
Yes, but then you would essentially have to be stepping into like Game of Thrones territory, and I don't know if this show necessarily needed that. Like, you would have to, create a religion from the ground up. And that I
don't think that's impossible, though. I mean,
it's not impossible.
Arrival created an entire culture and language from the ground up, and that worked great.
But that was the entire story of that movie.
Well, I think that it actually could have been pretty easy to create a religion from the ground up by creating a linguistic amalgamation. If you sort of had, in plain words, quoting the spirit of passages from the Bible and the Quran and the Torah and even other religious texts on top of that, and you sort of had the spirit of those passages in plain speak, I think that could have been a really good way to bring up that this is a flaw across religious oppressive systems all over, not just very specifically Christianity and Christianity alone. But Christianity could have easily been a part of that.
That would have been interesting, and that could have been a way to adapt the story towards a more modern context. Granted, this book was written during the time of the Reagan Era, so it was very much a response to that.
Yeah, and even without reading the book, just watching the TV show, it's very obvious that there had to be a lot of modernizations. I mean, if nothing else, the way that June and Lucas met was because they were goofing off about Tinder. Like, there's obviously a lot of modernization that has to come into play. And that probably extends to a lot of political stuff, and most likely a lot of stuff with casting. I'm going to guarantee it. But I think that would have been really important to point out. They did make it very obvious it is the U.S., and in the U.S., the major religious problem is Christianity. That is locally definitely 100% our biggest problem. To become very, very inflammatory, because I'm going to go there, we have more Christian terrorists than any other religion.
Yeah,
period.
Bombing abortion clinics.
Shootings.
The KKK
is still around and active. Yeah, exactly.
And neo-Nazis are often very religious too, because the swastika, although people try to say that Nazism is an atheistic belief system, it isn't. It's based on Christianity. The swastika is a broken cross. It's very much in relation to Christianity.
No, the swastika predates the Nazis.
Yes, it does, but the reason why they used it is actually Christian-based.
Oh, okay.
The reason why the Germans used it. I'm not talking about, like, yes, I know it's a symbol. Yeah, but the way they interpreted it is literally defined as a broken cross.
Okay.
Which says a lot of things about that country at that time.
Mm-hmm. But this actually does sort of become a problem, not with this show specifically, but I have with a lot of American media, is this could have been a really great opportunity to talk about, even if you want to make it very specifically Christian and nothing else, if you could have brought in like some Christian problems that are happening in other parts of the world. that could have been really interesting. But we look at everything through the lens of American issues and American issues only. It's really hard to get like a worldly perspective on anything in our media. It's not impossible. I'm just saying it is very extraordinarily few and far between.
I'm hoping that we see that with the seasons coming, because I think that part of this season's limitation,
with they sort of started to get into that a little bit when they had ambassadors from other countries coming in,
right? And I hope that the series expands and gets a little bit more global as it.
That would be really interesting. Yeah, I would just really like it if, especially in extraordinarily politically charged media, we start looking at things from a more worldly perspective. Like when Trevor Noah first started working on The Daily Show, I was super excited because he was starting to cover a lot of stories that were worldwide. I mean, he was particularly talking a lot about stories in Africa, but that's more than we usually get in American media.
Dude, anytime Trevor Noah talks about Africa, I'm like instantly interested. I'd rather him do like an African politics show or like, you know, a show from, you know, a South African's perspective, which is kind of what the show is, but I'd like just more of that. He kind
of went away from that after about the first month, I think. I think he brought up one story before I stopped watching the show. I watched the show for several months, actually. Yeah, after the first month, he pretty much only brought up one story because it was a continuation of something he had already mentioned. And that was about it. Like, he kind of went away from that really quick, which I was so excited about that. But, yeah, that would be really cool, especially since we're starting to get into... We've seen Canada now. We know that they're ambassadors. We know, like, there's this pack of letters that's trying to get out of the country to somewhere. We don't really know where. It would be really interesting if we can see if this is... Maybe it is already growing in other countries and we don't know it yet. Or if they're working in collusion with similar programs all over the country where it's like... You would think that they would be against each other, but they're actually working hand in hand. That would be really, really interesting from a political perspective if you brought that up in the show. You know, we did just have that $21 billion arms deal with Kuwait. You know, if that could sort of be, like, allegorically explained in the context of the show, that would be so fantastic.
Now, one thing that I will say about the show is the show was in development before we knew who was going to be president.
Right. So I'm not saying like the whole show is like Trump, but I'm saying that this arms deal, like I'm saying this because it literally just happened this week. But it's not like we haven't been making arms deals like that for fucking years. This is not news. This is not, oh, we just said that we're against this country because of their... You know, their established connections with terrorism, blah, 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 and then we turn around and we give them billions of dollars worth of money and arms and jets. Like, that's not new.
Well,
that's not a Trumpism. That's just the American way.
And getting on to the whole Canada thing, I don't think Canada will be a part of it because I think that the parallels that they're trying to make is clear with the Underground Railroad and...
Oh, I thought it was about the refugee crisis.
It is, but I'm saying, like, I think it was, like, called, like, the Underground Fem Road or something like that. Like, so, like, there's clearly obvious parallels. Yes, the refugee crisis is part of it, but I think the main thing is with the Underground Railroad. So I don't think Canada is going to be the bad guy here. Also, I think the book was written by somebody who was in Canada.
No, I don't think Canada is going to be the bad guy, but I'm saying that since we're going into Canada, it's making me hopeful that we might start seeing other parts of the world besides the U.S.
Okay, yeah,
That's all I'm saying. No, I don't think Canada is going to end up being the bad guy, but that is actually something, that was one of my favorite parts of the show, that was bringing in a more worldly perspective, was having, you know, showing how Americans going through the refugee process. I thought that was super fantastic because, you know, in America we have a lot of talk about refugees this and refugees that and we can't do this and this is the way the system works or whatever, but it's really difficult for Americans who have lived their whole lives here and haven't had any history of immigration in their family for at least a couple generations to really understand like what the process is like for refugees as individuals. So I thought that was really interesting that they took an American character, one so far, but two so far, and I think we're going to see more of it, and show the step-by-step process of kind of how difficult it is, and also how terrifying it is, and also the ways that it can help, and the ways that it can be, if we can figure out ways to make this a more functional system, can really help and bring a lot of hope and comfort to people. I think that that's one of the most interesting things that an American show could do right now.
Also, that the ending of this season was very reminiscent of the ending of 12 Years a Slave. So, I mean, those parallels are there. Now, granted, there was no Underground Railroad in that movie because he was actually lifted from slavery because of his status in...
That predated the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, I don't think it predated the Underground Railroad because from my understanding, the Underground Railroad was pretty much around since slavery started in the U.S.
Oh, okay. It's not like every slave had access to that or anything.
Right, exactly.
Ridiculous.
And that wasn't like...
It can't be part of every story.
Right.
Yeah.
But I did want to bring up something because this was something that we both talked about watching the show that we thought was strange, and that's the fact that the show doesn't bring up race once.
Yeah, like race is just a non-issue in the show, which is part of what I was talking about with the modernization. And I'm not talking about, she has a husband who's black and a best friend who's black, and like that's never mentioned. It's not that stuff, because that makes a lot of sense to me. It's that race doesn't play a part in this hierarchical system. There is no difference between a handmaid who's white and a handmaid who's black. A big part of the way the genetics is brought into the show is just, are you fertile or infertile, and that's the end of the story, unless there's something like you're a gender traitor. But that's it. Like, it's
if
weird
my memory
that
serves me wrong, correct me, but I don't think we saw any people of color that were commanders or...
Oh, no. The system, all the people in power are white, for sure. But there's no, you're going to be punished if you're gay. That's just a fact in this system. But you're not really worse off because of your race.
Right.
That doesn't make things even worse, is what I'm trying to say.
That's kind of a tricky thing because once you start incorporating those things, then that sort of domineers the conversation.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you have to be very
yeah.
careful about the way you bring it up, but it's also really odd to see that it's not brought up in any way.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing of, like, Moira gets punished more in any certain situation or anything like that. Like, that's just not a thing.
Well...
There's not even a scene of, like, a commander specifically requesting, like, oh, I want a handmaid who's like this.
Right, or
like,
having a black commander. Like, I think that could have gotten away from the issue a little bit more, and maybe we'll see it in next season where there are commanders of different races. But until that is present, the racial factor seems glaring, and nobody's talking about it.
Well, in the show, that's kind of the really odd thing is like...
Now, in the book, I don't think race was ever specified, and I kind of think all the characters were white. It was written at a different time, but that doesn't mean that characters can't be people of color. It just means that I just think that the writer wasn't incorporating that into her story.
Well, I mean, also it's a novel. You can get away with not incorporating that and not also saying that white is the default because it's a novel.
Yeah, I mean, people can assume whatever. One of my favorite sci-fi books actually is really interesting because, like, you read this whole novel and then you find out later that the main character is Filipino. And the book is Starship Troopers. That's not really a spoiler to the story. It's just kind of something interesting that...
It's just something that kind of doesn't come up until it does. And then it's like,
So hopefully if they bring that out again, the main character's Filipino, because it would be nice to see a Filipino actor playing a Filipino role.
Well, it's also kind of like Rick and Morty, too.
Yeah, Rick is Latino.
Well, he's Hispanic, but they also said, like, the creators haven't specified exactly what that means, but they're also like, it doesn't matter.
I mean,
it's
hell,
like,
I'm Latino. Does it really, like, play a factor into my life a lot? Not
No,
really.
but I mean, like, I do think it's weird that they're not like, oh, he's, Mexican or Puerto Rican or something,
Yeah. Well, sometimes when you don't have a cultural identity and you're just racial, then it is kind of weird. Because, like, at least for me, I mean, I'm Latino, but, like, I don't have, like, the cultural identity with it. So it's not like, I can go, like, oh, my people and all that kind of stuff, because I just can't. Because
you would look like Zac Efron.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was really taken aback by is how the subjective point of view of characters is portrayed on screen. This show has some of the most amazing cinematography that I've seen for a TV show. Mm-hmm. And it's very limited to specific characters' experiences. I also think that the sound design does an amazing job of also creating that subjective point of view. Usually in TV shows, it seems that you're getting a collective point of view on something, but, like, you aren't getting, like, these deeply personal things. Now, one show that did do this was Breaking Bad, but outside of that, I don't see it a lot in TV. Now, granted, if there's a show that you watch that does, please let me know.
That's one of the reasons why I don't think it's weird that we talk about quote-unquote TV on all walks of film, because it's gotten to the point where, again, quote-unquote television shows are really just very long, broken up movies. It's just sort of another form of cinema at this point.
Yeah, and in many ways, television is kicking the cinema's ass right now. Mm-hmm. It's kind of depressing as somebody who grew up loving film.
Well, it's also because they figured out how to market this right. In a lot of ways, the cinematic system, the theatrical system, is 20, 30 years behind. Well, like, the TV system...
They don't want to take risks. They just want to make the maximum profit, and they don't want to... They're kowtowing to the MPAA.
Right,
as
exactly.
Well.
Whereas television, again, quote-unquote television, doesn't have those problems anymore.
Yeah.
Because
it
now
did back in the 90s because, like, they had to work around everything because the ratings system, most television shows were not on cable and had to, abide by a lot of strict rules, or they'd get massive amounts of phone calls to the FCC.
Yeah, but it's also kind of hysterical what's been considered as, like, totally fine to have on normal daytime public access television. Like, John Mulaney has this whole sketch where he's totally right. Like, some of these crime drama shows can say the most disturbing, horrible things at, like, 3 p.m. when any little kid can turn it on and be like, oh, we found traces of semen in this little girl's ear canal or whatever the fuck. And it's like...
What kind of shows are you watching?
No, that was a real... He claims that that's a real thing from Law and Order SPV. Like, that was a real thing that they actually said on the show, or, like, vaginal bruising or rectal damage or whatever the fuck. It's just like, what? Seriously?
But also, you have shows... Now, granted, this is prime time, and if you know anything about the ratings board with television, you know that after 10 o'clock, it's pretty much anything goes, except, clearly... television stations like to police themselves when it comes to these things.
Right, and a lot of those, you actually have to go to, like, special access channels. Yeah,
but, like, you do have shows like Hannibal, which was on regular TV, that was pretty freaking edgy.
Yeah, that was extremely graphic and psychologically disturbing and all that stuff. Exactly.
And I think we have CSI to owe for that a little bit, because... they would show these crime scenes where it was pretty graphic, but then they'd actually show the crime happening, and...
it wouldn't be graphic.
Right. Or it would be to a certain extent, but they'd be able to get away with it because it's like, oh, it's a crime scene-ish. Like, ratings systems are really weird to me.
Yeah, but now, in the age of streaming, we have a lot of TV shows where it's financially more beneficial for them to do their own thing instead of cow down to well, this is what's trendy, this is what's popular, this is what's conventional, and this is what's safe, because those kinds of shows tend to die in a season or less. You know, the shows that are really succeeding now are the ones that are like, we have a specific vision, we have a specific statement, and not all of them, you know, Sense8, but a lot of them are, this is what we want to do, and we're going to make that happen. And since they're really just beholden to a subscription fee from viewers who are willing to watch these shows all the time because A, they can watch every episode, and then they can go buy merch, and it's quote-unquote free for them to easily access all these shows whenever they want, and then they can watch it with their friends and all this stuff. They're not beholden to a schedule. They don't have to pay, you know, $180 a month to get these shows. They don't have to, like, sit around and wait for a year for it to come out on DVD and then spend, like, $60 on a season. You know, this is making everything that, you know, it's giving them the power to have artistic integrity and the viewers to have immediate access and consume them if that's what they want. This is one of the best examples of a free market in entertainment that we have right now.
Now, I would actually love to have a debate with somebody over binge watching and week by week, because
No,
I
know,
think
but
this show succeeds at being a weekly show. Each episode feels contained, and oftentimes with binge shows, you know, shows where they release the entire season in one day, and granted, you can watch it whenever you want, I do feel that if you do actually watch the shows spaced out, you can see some of the pacing problems that this show doesn't have.
That wasn't my point. My point was that with streaming, you're not beholden to a schedule.
Right.
It's not like, oh, you know, this TV show that only comes on at 8 p.m., I don't have DVR, and I work 8 p.m. on Friday nights, I can't see the show. There you go, you know.
Well, just to talk about the whole binge thing, I was saying that, like, oftentimes when those shows come out, people watch it the entire weekend. Like, they'll just spend their whole weekend, watch the show, like, right when it comes out. And then you're behind because you have a life. And I'm not saying that they don't have lives too, but they were clearly able to have the time to, like, watch a full show in a couple days, whereas, like, you spaced it out. So this whole concept of water cooler talk and all that kind of stuff has kind of gone out the window with those type of shows. But I think shows like The Handmaid's Tale, you can be like, oh, did you see last week?
Right.
I personally like those better because everybody can kind of be on the same page. Whereas, like, with binge shows, oftentimes you have to, like, wait a couple weeks to, like, have a conversation. But you're talking about the show as a whole instead of, like, the individual episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back to the show, I really like the use of color in the show. It's very muted, but they do tend to ramp up the saturation for the show in the oppressive world. But, like, the real world is, like, a lot bleaker. I think we've seen that in something else. I'm trying to remember what that movie or show was.
What, like Snowpiercer? I mean, a little bit, yeah, but anyway.
So, I really think that The Handmaid's Tale is a show that pushes TV forward. I'm really interested to see where it goes now. I'm a little worried that it might be too influenced by Trump. Hopefully the show's smarter than that, but given the fact that they're moving away from Atwood's novel, it makes me a little worried. Now, what I will say is if Atwood actually has creative control over the series, that could be a good thing. I also know that Before the Flood is going to be another...
that's not always a good thing. The creator of Preacher was a creative force on the show, even though he was like, I was entirely hands-off and I kind of didn't really do anything. And it's like, yeah, it shows. It's not faithful to your vision at all. Not just in terms of technicality, but also in terms of spirit. Like,
yeah, if you're interested, I did a breakdown of the first episode because I was so frustrated with that show. Mm-hmm. And I'll put in the link. You can see it right now. But yeah, that show just frustrated the hell out of me. I stopped watching after 4 episodes. It's like, dude, if you like the show, fine, whatever. But I read the comics. I love the comics. And it's not enough like the comics for me to fall in love with the show.
I mean, I helped you out with that breakdown too, because exactly, it was that just frustrating and just like betrayal. But it's not even just, I mean, I do kind of have that thing where I'm like, how can you even like the show if you like the comics? But it's not a good show even without the comics. I mean, I kind of get why it's grabbing people's attention because it's not really like a lot of TV shows, but it's also just terrible. Like, the storytelling is awful. Most of the acting, except for Ruth Negga, is horrendously bad. And Ruth Negga is like the only saving grace because she's not Tulip at all, but she's interesting and funny, which is really the best you can get from the show. Just nothing like it, but kind of interesting.
Yeah, but Joseph Gilgun as Cassidy is just horrendous. Like, if you've ever met somebody from Ireland, you would understand why that accent is like nails on a chalkboard for me. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of just our first reaction to the show.
I mean, yeah, there's still like a lot of unanswered questions. Like, a couple of things that I noticed about the show is like, one of them is like, why would you not have birth control tests? We haven't really gotten into why this world is so anti-science that you don't even have pregnancy tests when you're in, like, most of your society is based around if a woman is pregnant or not. Like, why would that be a thing that's on the
Christians
black market?
Today are so anti-science. They don't even, like,
I know,
they
but
don't
the
even
show hasn't
understand,
gotten
like,
into
pregnancy and, like,
I know.
what, you know, all
I know,
this kind of
but
stuff.
I'm really curious to see when the show gets into why, like, what their justification for that is.
Yeah, I would like to see the world building like that. I don't know if they will, but, like, I'm going to expect that the show is going to start explaining more.
They have doctors. They have medical personnel still. They do surgical procedures. So it's not like it's all completely banished, you know. You see a guy surgically get his hand cut off, and it was really gnarly and disturbing. It was awesome. But that's still a thing that exists in their world that's not, like, frowned upon or discouraged or on the black market. So, like, why pregnancy tests?
Yeah, and of Glenn had FGM, female genital mutilation.
Yeah. Yeah, she did.
Which is a surgical process as well.
Mm-hmm. So, like, this is still a thing that's going on. Ofried also went to a doctor because they were like, are you pregnant? Are you not pregnant? You know, this is... Or, no, it wasn't that. It was because they were concerned that she was sick or something like that. Because she was talking about how she was fainting all the time, even though it wasn't true. So, like, there's still medicine. There's still medical personnel. Just... And obviously there's still weaponry.
Right. Well, a lot of this stuff I think is still bleeding into the whole, like, religious conservatism and religious conservatives, especially from the South. I'm not going to say that it's not all over the United States because it clearly is, but, you know, religious conservatives in isolated areas, oftentimes, they have a lot of guns. They don't read a lot of things outside of the Bible. Mm-hmm. And there's usually negative opinions about medicine, psychology, which explains why they don't know how to work with these women. Like, why aren't there psychologists there? Like, granted, they are still trying to make an oppressive society and all that kind of stuff, but I do find it kind of interesting that, like, they wouldn't have, like, a psychologist or, like, a religious person to, like, talk to when people are, like, dealing with problems and all that kind of stuff, because that clearly seems to be...
Well, like, even in a religious perspective, you still encourage people to go to priests or to go to confession or that kind of thing.
That is an interesting thing about the show that I don't know why doesn't exist. Why isn't there any confession in the show?
Well, there's no church. There's no... We go to a place and we pray. There's no... you know, religious leaders outside of the people who are also governmental leaders.
I'm really interested to see if
there's no religious community. There's just a religious society.
I'm really interested to see if there's even...
The closest thing to church that they have is the salvaging.
Yeah, but do they even have worship? Because, like, based on the information that I've seen in the show so far, I would say that they don't.
Yeah, I mean, like, you see individuals praying in certain moments, or, like, they say, you know, offhand comments of, like, praise be, or, you know, under his eye, or whatever. But yeah, there's no, oh, we get together as a household and we pray at this time. Like, the closest thing we get is at the savaging, because the only reason I say that that's kind of like church is because you have them in rows, kind of like pews with, like, the little kneeling thing like you have on the communion, and you have, your religious leader who speaks and sort of gives a small sermon before the big event, which in this case isn't a communion. It's, something like, we need to murder somebody.
But it's not to say that there wouldn't be that, just because something that I've praised the show for is staying in the subjective mind. Mm-hmm. If you branch outside of Ofried's subjective mind, you might see that certain stuff like that goes on. I mean, we did see the council where they were making decisions. Yeah, but there might be services and stuff done.
But then why would her family not participate in that? That would be weird.
We don't know what time periods that we're seeing. It's possible that there might be certain days where they might do things like that and the show just didn't show it. I think that's weird.
Yeah.
But I don't know. One of the most interesting characters in this show, I forgot what her name was for a second.
Aunt Lydia?
Janine.
Oh, yeah, Janine of Warren of Daniels.
Yeah.
It gets confusing because she literally has 3 names in one season.
The first time I ever saw this actress was in an episode of Black Mirror, where she played, like, this fierce, like, kind of crazy soldier. Mm-hmm. And they were hunting down roaches. I don't really want to get into this episode because there are, like, a ton of spoilers for that. Watch Black Mirror. If you haven't watched Black Mirror, what are you doing? So I was, like, really fascinated by Madeline Brewer, that's the actress's name, and seeing her on this show, I think she's one of the greatest strengths of this show. There's something about her character that just, like, draws me to her. She's incredibly naive. She definitely is a simpleton, but the show never gets to the point where people are frustrated by her naivety. I guess to a certain extent they do.
Well, but the wife definitely does. That was one of the interesting things I kind of figured out about the show, because for a while I was thinking, like, that's so weird that they have a handmaid until the handmaid pops out a baby and then they, they get rid of her. Wouldn't you try to have as many children as you can? But then it occurred to me that they probably have an option of keeping her or getting rid of her, and that almost every household has a problem.
Yeah, it's really weird because Janine thinks that he loves her and she's, like, swept up in this whole...
We're gonna be a family thing.
Yeah, and clearly in this society that's not allowed. But you can tell through certain elements that guy clearly wanted to run away with her.
Is that what you got? My understanding was that he was fucking lying to her.
Well, he strikes me as the kind of guy that could run away with her, like, 1 week, come back, ditch her.
Yeah.
There wasn't, like, really a romance with them. I think there was just a thing of how he couldn't fuck his wife, so he starts getting attached to this woman, though the eye thing would turn off a lot of people.
Well, I kind of got the impression that he was saying that to her in order to get her to have an affair with him. It's weird that there are, like, all these affairs with the commanders and the handmaids, even though they are fucking in front of the commander's wife.
Well, like, but that way they're able to do it.
It's kind of fucked up.
Yeah, but that way they're able to do it without, like, this weird fucking ceremony that's, like, not sexy at all. I mean, like, I can totally understand, also, like, that one scene where the commander can't get it up because, like, I mean, Jesus fuck, man. Like, as much as this is about the subjective experience of the women and all that kind of stuff, let's step outside of that for a second. Like, just as a dude, like, I don't see how, like, that situation could be sexy in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it's not sexy for anybody.
Yeah.
That's the point. But the other thing about these, like, illicit affairs is that there is still coercion involved. I think that this is the point that they're trying to do, is there's coercion involved anyway. Fred and Ofried are having an affair, but it's mostly because, well, it starts out to be mostly because she can't say no to him when he wants to dress her up like a little doll and take her to some undisclosed location and put her in his wife's cloak and give her makeup and, you know, take her to a hotel and have sex with her there. It's not like that's any less of rape than when he does it in the ceremony. You know,
right.
They're having an affair, but it's still coerced. And I think that in Janine's case, he was coercing her with, like, oh, but I love you, so I want to have sex with you, even though really it's just, I'm horny and I want to have sex with you.
Though with Nick, it wasn't.
No, that's a different thing. That's not, and he's not a commander. I mean, like, that was a different thing, yeah.
Though I thought their relationship was interesting, because, like, you could never quite get a full grasp of what his motivations were, because...
He's
you know,
and it's weird.
Yeah, but you can tell that because of the information that we got of him trying to find a job, like earlier, for a lot of this just seems like a job for him. Like he's not really like attached to it ideologically.
Right. This is just something that it's sort of something that's happening around him. And it's kind of interesting too, because from an objective perspective, this is the best he's done in his life. But he's not like, oh, well, that's why I'm loyal. He's not really loyal. He just doesn't have any other option.
Well, in a way, he's like the Handmaids, just a part of this system. Like, he's a tool. He's not a person. Right,
and I like that his storyline really is tackling a lot of the economic realities for Americans.
Yeah, but also getting into some of the categories, because this easily could have just been about the women's experience, but I think that Margaret Atwood and the producers were really egalitarian when they presented this, to not make it a male versus woman story, even though all the implications given a short read of this story would say that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, just once again commend the show for that. Because if it leaned too much of the men are monsters, you know, blah, 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 I wouldn't have gotten into it. I love this show.
Well, like, there's that one article that I had read that was about how it was an episode where it was like, this show proves that men are evil. You know, oh, Mrs. Waterford was abusing Ofried, but it was only because of Mr. Waterford, don't you see? This is like at the midway point in this series where it's like, this is kind of before it kind of came out that like, oh, she's penned a lot of these laws that are oppressing women. Like, you can't just be like, oh, it was because of the evilness of her husband, you know, whatever. That's bullshit. Come on.
Do you
that is not how simplistic this show is. That's a ridiculous way to read the show.
Do you think she's modeled after Ayn Rand?
She might be.
Because I always thought Ayn Rand was like an interesting character, because like you read some of the stuff that she wrote and you're just like, well, clearly a guy wrote this, right? And then you're just like, oh, interesting. Because like a lot of her stories are very patriarchal. They're also like extremely capitalistic. I mean, the whole frickin' game BioShock is based off of her ideology found in The Fountainhead and mostly Atlas Shrugged.
Right. But yeah, I do think that it's ridiculous to look at the show through the lens of, this is about women good and men evil, and look at the evils of men. Like, that's 100% not what the story's about.
Right. And while I can understand that being a read of the show, it is not an accurate read.
Right. And especially because a big part of the show is talking primarily about the subjugation of women. It's also, a lot of it does point out that it's not like everything is hunky-dory for men. Obviously, it's not as bad. Like, let's not even front. In this situation, It's obviously not as bad. But it's not like they're all running around with their male privilege cards having a gay old time while the women are suffering. Like, that's ridiculous.
I will say that it would logistically make more sense if they truly wanted to have more children in the world, that they would actually try to figure that out and select the men and the women
that's
to
part
do
of
that.
that's part of the problem with the story, or that's one of the problems that the story is addressing, is that they're so fucking backwards that they're not even willing to do the best thing for their one stupid cause.
Right.
You know, you're not even checking to make sure that the commanders aren't sterile. You know, you're not even having, pregnancy tests. You're not even, like, trying to do anything to up your odds of increasing fertility or pregnancy.
Yeah, and
You're just...
it's pretty obvious that it's Nick's son.
Yeah, that's, like, literally not even important at this point, as far as I'm concerned. It literally doesn't matter yet. But it's all sort of like this way just because a handful of guys in a limo said one day, oh, we're going to make it this way. And that's just quote-unquote the way it is. You know, it doesn't really matter that it's not actually helping the cause. That literally their entire society is based around.
So, I spoke about this earlier, talking about how this show sort of helped me understand women in a way that I hadn't thought of before. And I kind of wanted to expand on that a little bit. Mm-hmm. So this show portrays this very personal experience of always feeling trapped. You know, like you're in a box. Sort of similar with all the Nutcracker imagery and everything like that. But
Mm-hmm.
this...
Swan Lake.
Yeah.
I'm a Tchaikovsky person. I had to just...
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I saw the ballerina, and the first thing I thought, yeah, no, you're totally right. Swan Lake, and yeah. That was my mistake. But this whole idea of being blocked from achieving, being treated as a second-class citizen based on something so simple, facing fears that not a lot of guys think about all the time, of constantly being a target, or, you know, constantly having to deal with the fact that other people desire you. This can be grossly portrayed as people catcalling people on the street, but I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because, you know, when women go to bars and when women go out, there is sort of an expectation of them responding in a certain way. I mean, guys will get mad if they make advances to them and they turn them down, but also just this whole experience of never being able to be free with your identity. We're starting to see women allowed to do this more often in today's society, but it definitely harkens back to a time where women haven't been able to do that, where their identity, their true identity, stayed limited to the women around them, to the works that they wrote, and to pretty much anything that they could do outside of circumstances where men and women were present. Circumstances where only women could be present, or circumstances where they were by themselves. I mean, I do think it's interesting in the show that there doesn't seem to be a ward for women, which is something that was very prominent all the way going to, I want to say the 70s, of like, if your wife was too unruly or whatever, you could just send her to an insane asylum, which is what I constantly thought was...
We do see that.
Okay, yeah, with Janine.
Ofglen, Alexis Bledell's character.
Because of her sexuality?
Yeah, because of her sexuality. And then with Janine, you're right.
Right, okay,
you know, there is this thing where, like, when the women are too unruly, they're sent to a ward, and they get fucked with in a very physical way to be like, no, you can't do that anymore. You know, your sexuality is wrong, we're gonna fix that. Oh, your brain's wrong, we're gonna fix that.
Yeah, but it's like a...
But
we're talking about, like, quick fixes. I'm talking about, like, you know, like, you actually get put away. Like, we haven't seen that. We've seen... We're going to do a quick fix and we're going to put you back in.
Well, we have seen women get murdered.
True.
But yeah, part of that is also because we're only focusing on handmaids, and handmaids do have a privilege. And that's actually one of the things I like about this show, in shows like this, where it's showing how hard it is for handmaids, but handmaids also have it better than literally all of the other women in their society. And the reason why I like that is because it becomes a thing of, you can't compete about whose life is harder when everybody suffers.
Right. They keep on talking about, like, they'll send them to the colonies.
And we don't even really know what that means yet.
Yeah, there was some offhand line about it being something about, like, picking up waste or, you know, some sort of manual labor intensive thing. But, like, we haven't... It's
probably going to be like a concentration camp.
Yeah. But we haven't seen that. And that's probably where the women who can't have babies go.
Yeah, we haven't really gotten into how they choose... Like, obviously there are the handmaids who are fertile and they're going to be handmaids. But then with all the other women, you know, some of them are selected to do other things in the society. They could become aunts or they could become cooks or whatever. We haven't really figured out how socially they distinguish who gets to do that work as opposed to going to the colonies. That's going to be kind of interesting to see how that hierarchy plays out too.
And given the fact that this is a show with multiple seasons, I hope that they expand on that, because while I understand that oftentimes, frustratingly, dystopian novels are notorious for this, for just not explaining shit.
Mm-hmm. Like how this infertility thing works.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of
the entire premise of the show. We still don't know after a season how it works or anything.
Well, look at the movie or the book, The Road. They never explain what happened to the world.
Yeah, but also in The Road, it doesn't matter that much.
Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of true with The Handmaid's Tale, too. I'm not saying it's not, but also The Road was a movie as opposed to a TV show.
Yeah, and I got a feeling that the book played more on that than the show did. Like, the show is probably, you know, I'm going to read the book, but it seems like the show is adding more context that's raising more questions that can be answered in later seasons, because that was probably always the plan, to have multiple seasons of a show, whereas, you know, the book was self-contained. Though it might take place in a universe that Margaret Atwood, because I'm not really sure how she writes books, but I know that Before the Flood or After the Flood, one of those books that's being adapted is like part of a series.
Right.
So I would need to do some more research on that. But yeah, as far as the show goes, I was really blown away by this show. This is by far the best show that's come out in 2017.
So far. I mean, basically, we have Legion that was disappointing at the end. Legion that was so promising and then so disappointing.
Well, it was so promising for being different, and then it just wound up being like everything else we've seen.
No, I don't really think that was the problem. It was more that the first handful of episodes felt like it was going somewhere and doing something, and then the last 3 episodes were, we will throw everything at the wall in like this mishmash conglomeration, and then we're also just not going to take any particular direction on it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
But the interesting thing about that, though, is like, it's over. You know, the next series is going to have nothing to do with this one. You know, I kind of like these self-contained mini-series that are all part of one universe sort of idea.
Yeah, well, I think the show will continue on Ofried's story, but like
Oh, I was talking about Legion, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, because like the next season isn't still called Legion. It's called like, I don't know what it's called actually. Fuck, I can't remember. It's called like New Mutants or something.
I think that's a different show.
Is it really? Oh, I thought they were related.
Yeah.
Shit. Never mind.
It's just like, on the same channel.
It's basically that one show. Everything else is going to be like new seasons of shows. It's like it's like the new Attack on Titan, the new Game of Thrones, the new Rick and Morty, and the new South Park, and like what else is really going on in television this year? That's like
Stranger Things.
No, but like I'm saying, like these are all new seasons of older shows.
Okay.
I'm talking about like
this is
what is this?
This Is
continuing
Us was a great show that came out.
Oh shit, that's true.
No,
This
actually,
Is Us
it was
is really good.
It came out last year, but we just watched.
No. It started last year, but it continued over this year.
Yeah.
I would count that.
Okay.
But like, I don't know what else besides those two shows. Like, what are they really in contention with?
I know I really want to watch Blood Drive, but that's
that's gonna be cool.
Something else. And if you have any recommendations for shows, like I will usually give a show like 1 or 2 episodes, but like I'm extremely picky on TV shows because I don't have the time to just watch all the TV shows. So if it doesn't interest me in 2 episodes, I can acknowledge that it might be a good show, but if I can't get that interest in, I usually drop it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let us know what you thought of The Handmaid's Tale. Let us know what you thought of the politics of the show. Do you think it's relevant? Do you think that perhaps it should be something else? Do you think that they should incorporate things about religion a little bit more? Do you think that they should, meld different ideas? Or do you think that it should be more explicit to Christianity? Also, where would you like to see the second season go? If there's any topic or movie that you would like us to discuss, you can email us at allwalksofilm@gmail.com, or you can just leave a comment below. Thanks for listening.